All right, last talk of the day. And I think it'll be a fun talk. We're going to talk about discoverability of ChatGPT apps, MCP apps. And I apologize in advance. I'll probably use those terms a bit interchangeably. Quickly about who I am, who we are. I'm Vincent McLeese. I'm CTO and co-founder of Ghost Team. We're a development studio and agency, and we design, build ChatGPT apps, MCP apps for mostly enterprise clients. We're also building a platform called App Discoverability. Once you submit your app, what then? So today we're going to share a little bit about some of our thinking and what we've been doing on the app discoverability side. So who here has submitted a ChatGPT app or a Claude app? I'm curious. See who in the room? Good. A couple of you guys. So if you haven't yet, project yourself in the future. You have developed a killer use case. You've tested it. You've gone through the submission process. You got it submitted. It's live, right? What then? You get it discovered. You want users to use it, right? OK, great. So they just come, right? That's it. You just wait around, and a bunch of users come. Yeah, that's how discoverability works. Well, once you go live, it's actually a black box. You're going to be blind on so many important questions, like, are the people that I'm targeting my app to prompting, and are my apps or the tools that target those prompts being recommended? Is an LLM choosing my app and my tools over other similar apps and tools? So all of these kinds of stuff, you have no idea. So we journeyed a little bit into this black box as best as we could. We sent one of our ghosts, and we did a thorough analysis of 148 live ChatGPT apps. And we did over 15,000 simulations, all kinds of prompts. And what we want to do today is try to give you a little bit of light, a little bit of insight into some of this black box, so that once you have your own MCP app live, you have a few tools or a few ideas to start to think about, how can I optimize, how can I make sure that what I built actually gets discovered and actually gets used. And we're going to do this by sharing our 3 discoverability foundations: live LLM monitoring, conversational testing, and continuous optimization. So we're going to get into these 3. But first, and I'm sorry if you've already had this like 5 times today, I'll be very brief. But I want to make sure we're all a little bit on the same page. A very quick MCP app recap. So the MCP app protocol has been adopted by major LLMs. And over 1 billion users are using these LLM clients every single month, right? So what are we talking about? Like 10% of the planet's population? I actually don't know what the planet's population is now. Anyways, this is getting noticed. In the last few months, we've seen a huge uptick of MCP apps, a lot of ChatGPT apps, but also Claude MCP apps, with over 600 now that we're tracking on our app discoverability platform. And these are big brands. This is really taking notice. A lot of brands want to get in on the ground floor, because the potential of this distribution channel is gigantic. So what does this enable? Why is MCP apps interesting? Brands or companies or developers, if you want to create a game, you can now surface a controlled experience based off of prompts. So an obvious one is show me a hotel. The model does a little bit of reasoning, decides, OK, I want to call a tool, and surfaces a booking.com app. Why, right? Why would it do that? So that is where we start to get into the discoverability aspect. Why does the prompt lead to the model to call a tool? Why would that tool then surface a specific widget? And various clients are doing different flavors of discoverability at the moment. OpenAI, and maybe you've played around with it, you need to go to their app store, you need to actively connect, then you need to mention. Claude makes it a little bit easier. You just connect. You don't need to mention, so the model's actually reasoning and surfacing apps that you've already connected to. Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, they're very early, but they're actually testing fully organic discoverability at the moment with a couple of MCP apps where you do not need to connect and you don't even need to mention. So you say, I want to learn something, and then a Coursera app might pop up. And this is the expected direction that LLM clients will go into in the future. And this is also what makes this distribution channel very interesting for a lot of MCP app builders, because you want what you've created to be also organically discovered based on the intents in the moments that matter. So for the rest of this talk, I want to project ourselves a little bit into the future and work on the assumption that this is the direction that is going to go. So what type of challenges, what kind of problems are we going to face when we're really facing an organic discovery with MCP apps? And here we're going to talk about the discoverability problem. And in our analysis, I think one big fact that I want to share and kind of build this narrative around is that 14% of the time, ChatGPT apps did not invoke for their really obvious and direct prompts. This is huge, so 1 in 7 times. Can you imagine if you had a website and 1 in 7 times the website just didn't load, right? So this is kind of like a starting point of where we want to look at for when we're talking about discoverability, so that we can get more insight and start to understand really how are we going to make MCP apps that are kind of winning. So it really just starts with live LLM monitoring. This is the first of the 3 foundations that are critical for app discoverability. So you have to be able to answer a couple critical questions. Is the LLM calling tools when users are mentioning your app? What model is the user using when they're calling, right? So is it ChatGPT 5.3 or something else? Are my tools being chosen over competitors? Or did an update, a system prompt update, or some other kind of update change something? And this is not something you can get from MCP server logs. So stuff like also geography, context, and personalization. All that stuff is invisible to you unless you are doing some sort of live LLM monitoring. And this is very tedious. You have to go into ChatGPT or Claude and do this manually. But it is really the only way. So I'm going to give a few examples of the kinds of things you're missing if you're not actively doing this. One thing we found is that model degrades invocation. So the exact same prompt, exact same scenario that works on ChatGPT 5.3 doesn't work for other models. And if you're a free user on ChatGPT, after just a couple big requests, you hit a usage limit and they downgrade you for a while. The free user doesn't even know, but in the meantime, they may have a poorer experience with the tools that you've created. Another interesting insight is that even if a user directly mentions your MCP app, doesn't mean that the model will actually invoke your tools. The model loves their own training data. And if they think that they can do a better job or your tool description is really unclear, they'll ignore it. They can be a little bit stubborn. And this is something you can also easily miss unless you're doing these upstream in-client tests. So mentioning doesn't even mean invocation per se. So step 1, do live LLM monitoring. Track your invocation rates, know what that means, track your mentions versus invocation rates, know what models are performing well, which ones are not, and be prepared to take action. The next step is conversational testing. So I actually looked at a bit of how I prompt. So these are real prompts I've made. And I'll say stuff this is to Claude Code. Fix this issue on the dashboard, and I'll attach a screenshot. And I'll be like, no, not that issue. And then I'll say, no, it's still not fixed, fix it. And then I'll say something in Dutch about my pension, all in the same conversation. This is how I prompt, and I think some of you might be able to relate to this, because Opus 4.6 is really good. It just gets stuff done, and I totally trust it. It knows when to call tools in the background. So I've become used to prompting in kind of a pretty poor way. How most teams are now testing MCP apps is a little bit like this. They'll create something called the golden prompt set, And it's kind of this hand-fits-glove, perfect prompt testing, where the tool is extremely happy because it gets exactly the elicitation that it wants. So exact airport codes, date. The description of search for available flights is pretty much the name of the tool. This is just not realistic. And even if you create indirect or negative prompts, you're really not getting to how people are actually talking to LLMs. Now, you may be thinking, OK, well, these models are very smart. They can probably reason, even with poor prompts. We did a little bit of testing, and we looked at 4 different personas, a kind of a golden prompt persona, a power user, which is very to the point. They really use the right words. And then we kind of took steps away to people where they started to get less and less correct. With a non-technical user, they're using incorrect terms. They're all over the place and very vague. So we did 5,000 prompts to the same models to see what happens with different personas, with different types of prompts. And very, very striking 20-point difference between a golden prompt set user and a non-technical user. So they have the same intents. They just explain it in a totally different way. Invocations way down, wrong tools way up. So if you're not understanding how your users are actually prompting, you're not going to get an accurate view of, is your app actually being invoked? So be sure to use actual conversational testing. What I recommend is really think deeply about who your target persona is. Try to create model conversations that are very messy. Have Claude extrapolate, create hundreds, so that you can really throw a lot of unclear prompts just to start to understand, OK, are my tools able to capture this? And the last piece is continuous optimization. So one, I think, Stanford-led research earlier this year found that almost 100% of tools have quality defects. And they found, I think, even half of tools fail to even clearly describe what they're looking at. I think they had a sample set of a couple thousand tools across, I think, not necessarily MCP apps, but just MCP servers in general. And we do a lot of tool descriptions for our clients. And we know how critical every single word can be in a tool description. So for one MCP app we're doing for Statista, just a single word increased the tool success rate by nearly 6%. So you have to be extremely diligent, extremely careful when you're crafting these tool descriptions. And when we start to think about organic discoverability, you also have to start thinking about your category. So don't think in a silo. You have to think comparative to, let's say, like you're in the travel industry. We did an analysis of 6 different ChatGPT apps in travel, and we threw increasingly less clear prompts at it. The higher quality the tool descriptions were, the better it did. So you could see that descriptions that are very clear, this is the OpenAI official guidance, by the way, to start with the use this when, and very clear differentiating language on why you should be using this tool, outperforms unclear, vague tools for apps that have similar purposes. At the end of the day, these tools all want to do the same thing. One very important thing is that this is not a one-time fix. You can't just go in and be like, hey, I have the perfect tool description, works super well, it works with my conversational testing, because things change, right? The model changes. Your user behavior changes. So it needs to be continuous. You need to think of a cycle. You need to be doing this every few weeks, this cycle of continuous monitoring, continuous improvement, and also be looking at how are your competitors doing their tools. Make sure you have alerts on. You see if they're updating their tool descriptions, and be prepared to react. And the good news is we have seen this before. And we have seen this before with SEO. Right? In 2005, we were kind of one-shotting metadata for websites. That's exactly what we're doing now with tool descriptions. We're kind of doing our best. We're doing tests, and then we submit, and then we kind of let go and hope for the best. Well, I think this is a nice peek into the future, because now we're doing autonomous, agentic-driven SEO, right? Where we're essentially continuously updating and monitoring in a very fast cycle. So this is likely the direction that MCP app discoverability will go in as well. So at Ghosteen, we're working with Parthy loops, actually, to try to roll up the LLM live monitoring, the conversational testing, and iterating on the tool metadata to see if we word it this way or if we add a word here. Is that something that is improving that score, so we either revert or keep, so that we can continuously monitor and cycle and get into that continuous optimization flow? So the takeaway is, don't just lock it in and let it go. You have to be very active with your tool metadata. You have to constantly be looking at competitors. You have to be looking at invocation rates. Obviously, there is a bit of a limitation. You need to always resubmit. But for instance, apps on the iOS store is the exact same thing. You just need to get into a cycle and continuously be monitoring this, especially as it gets more crowded on the playing field and you want to win those organic prompt discoveries. So that's the talk. Thank you very much. We're building out app discoverability to help MCP app builders get their app discovered. So navigating that black box, making sure that they're constantly optimizing their tool descriptions and winning for the target markets and user personas they're targeting. We have the LLM monitoring live on our platform. It's in a beta phase. So if you have a ChatGPT app, or you're also just curious to start monitoring a ChatGPT app to kind of see how it's performing, also maybe see some of the failures, feel free to sign up, have a look. And that's it. So thank you for attending. And I think we're ready to get some drinks. But I'm also happy to answer some questions if there's any in the audience. Yeah?
So ChatGPT, is there such a thing as like organic at all? Because you mentioned that you have to mention and you have to connect. So is no organic?
So I'll give you the full story. When they first launched, there was organic. So I even have some screen recordings I've made of like I want to book a flight and then Expedia gets recommended. They have turned this off, and there's a couple theories why. One is they're figuring out the technology. Obviously, there is still some challenges with tool context and tool bloating. There's also was a little bit of critique, are they ads or not, right? So they're figuring out the user experience side. There are some reports where you can on ChatGPT connect and not mention, but it's not consistent. I haven't found a consistent behavior there. So the dominant pattern I'm seeing there is you have to connect and mention. But we've heard from the OpenAI team that organic discoverability is on the roadmap. You're welcome. All right, thank you very much.